of love. Now, opening question for today's sermon. What impact do you have on your neighbors? Those are the people, like I said a moment ago, that live around you. So if you've got a fence behind you and the person behind you, that person counts as a neighbor. If it's a person beside you on either direction, and if you still don't know, then ask yourself, what's the next number in the address cycle to you? If you say that my address is 6105, well, who is at 6106? Okay, that's the next question you ask if you still don't know. But what impact do you have on your neighbor? You see, as we kind of ask that question, I want you to put it this way. If the earth was flat and you were to walk off the end of the earth, would your neighbor miss you? If the earth was flat and you were to walk off the end of the earth, would your neighbor miss you? Because here's the thing. If your neighbor would not miss you, I have a question about your effectiveness. I have a question about my effectiveness if my neighbors would. And I'll be the first to confess right now. I've got some neighbors that if I walked off the face of the earth, they would be like, you know what, we missed that Josh guy. He was pretty good. I've got some neighbors, though, I'll confess, who I don't know their name. I don't know if they know my name. And besides the occasional, hey neighbor, good to see you, we don't know each other. You have a question? Awesome job. So you're already friends with your neighbors. Well, great job. So keep that up. Now maybe the neighbor across the street, except make sure you ask your parents before you cross the street. But that's where I want us to focus on is what impact do you have on your neighbors? You see, in our text today, we're going to realize that Jesus stirs within his followers this compassionate love for other people. And he calls us as believers, as disciples of his, to share in the truth that he's given for the world. So if we do not know our neighbor, if you can't tell me the name, you can't tell me anything about it, if that's where you're at, if you're like me, then we have some homework to do. Okay? And I'm not, as I say, I'm going to be stepping on your toes, but I'm stepping on mine too, because I've got some neighbors that I don't know yet. And I've lived there for long enough, I should know them. So Jesus is calling us to compassionately show love to these people. And that's where our text is going to come at from today. Matthew chapter 9 is our primary text for today. Matthew chapter 9, beginning in verse 35. And so if you have a Bible, we're going to be in those few verses for a moment. What I want us to do is I want us to read the text together, and then I want us to spend some time discussing the text. And after we've spent some time discussing the text, I want us to make an application that's valuable for all of us, okay? Starting in verse 35, if you will with me. Jesus went through all the town and the villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. There's kind of our key word for the day. If you want to circle or underline or highlight or whatever that word, go ahead and do that. He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers, well, there just ain't enough of them. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest field. So let's focus on just a couple of the key phrases in this passage. We're going to focus on those couple of key phrases, and then I hope that we'll leave with an application that fits for all of us today, okay? The first thing that I notice is as we're going through, this happens in verse 35 and 36. We are told that there's this crowd that is gathering around Jesus. There's this crowd that's following him, and we're told that he's healing people. And I don't know about you, oftentimes I think of the crowd that follows Jesus much like zombies. You know, in every zombie movie, how's a zombie dressed? Punched him in the gut, and he is bent over in pain. That's the kind of word that's used here. It's not that we sometimes think of compassion as this well, let me throw a quarter or a dollar or a couple of bucks out the window to the guy that's begging. That's sometimes the way we look at compassion. But Jesus, when he experiences this compassion, it's as if someone has punched him in the gut and he says, wait a second, these people are really hurting. You ever been punched in the gut, Jim? Time or two? It kind of hurts, doesn't it? I won't tell her that you pointed to. It hurts. Anyone else been punched in the gut? It could even be back. You could even run into the countertop. I don't care how you got punched in the gut. It hurts. Sends you over in pain. And so as Jesus is looking at this crowd in verse 36, and he had compassion on them, it was a gut check for who he was. Now, I could look at this at two ways, or we could look at this at two ways. One, I could look and I could say, man, it's because their life was just so poor. It was because their life was just so destitute. But that then goes against the reality that these are hardworking folks who probably are somewhat okay in life. What I realized is that he was being gut checked because he was seeing the effects of sin. He was seeing what was destroying their lives. When someone comes in and they say, I now have cancer. When someone was coming in and they're saying, I just lost a loved one. When someone was coming in and was saying, I need prayers because this is happening in my life, Jesus is experiencing the effects of sin in this world, and so his reaction is of pain. What that tells me is that when you have pain in your life, the pain that you experience is a pain that Jesus can sympathize with. He can empathize with you. He understands. Because when he sees the pain that you deal with, it's kind of like someone is punching him in the gut. And he's saying, man, what can I do for you? The next thing I notice is that he uses two words to describe the crew that he sees. He's looking out over this crowd. Jesus' reaction is that of compassion, but he uses two words when he looks out at this crowd. They both starts with the letter H. Can anyone find the two words that describe the crowd? Harassed and helpless. You can go ahead and probably underline those two because those are important words here. But he says, I see the crowd, they're harassed and helpless. Harassed is actually a graphic word. Now, we think of harass probably more in the bullying realm. Someone comes up and they start bullying, they start picking, and we think of that as harassment. And that is probably for our term today, that's really the way it is. But the word that Jesus uses here is a word that basically means cutting. The full definition of it is basically you've been skinned, which I can't imagine being skinned alive. One of the disciples did that. I don't remember which one, but that's a pretty horrible way. But the best way to describe it is, have you ever fallen into a wild berry bush? Mike's got anyone fallen into a wild berry bush? I'll take a cactus. A cactus will work. There was a time as a kid I used to go horseback riding a lot and came across a whole bunch of wild berry bushes. And man, those are so good, aren't they? Have you ever picked wild berries before? Okay. They're so good. And you're picking these wild berries and something happens, you lose your step and you fall in. Or you could just, I don't know, maybe some of you have roses or something like that. What happens when you fall into or you get tangled up in a wild berry bush? The thorns get you. You walk out of there and you're cut all over. And they're not really too deep, but man, they hurt, don't they? It's when you shower the next time that you start finding all the ones you didn't know you had. That's the idea that's had here, is that Jesus is looking at a crowd of people and they are just cut all over. It's not that they're physically cut, they're spiritually cut all over. They don't have anyone properly leading them. They're in that kind of pain where they've just been cut and sliced. And can you imagine paper cuts all over your body? Oh, those are horrible. And that's the way Jesus is describing this, is he says that they are harassed. They've been irritated, but they're helpless. Helpless has a funny picture with it. I want you to picture a sheep on its back. I want you to pick, now if you're a sheep on your back, what do you look like? I wish I had a video of it. The only videos I found of the sheep was just kind of laying there like this. But yeah, Mary, thank you for that. He can't get up. A sheep could flail their legs all day long, but they're not going to be able to do anything. How come?
You're stuck.
You're stuck. Sheep's backs are flat. It's not like a donkey. A donkey's back is like that. Sheep's backs are flat. So when they fall onto their back, they can't roll over. Can you imagine? It's a big old sheep. It's like the hippopotamus, but they got like little bitty legs. Y'all seen sheep legs? Itty bitty little old legs. I wear a size 12 shoe. I don't know. Anyone got? I know Mason's got like a 13 or so. Anyone got bigger than a 13 shoe? Brian's got a bigger. What's Brian's shoe size? 14. Mason, are you 14 shoe size? No. We got the biggest shoe size of 14 here. You got a big foot, so you can like keep your balance. It spreads this stuff out so that if you start moving, you're ready to flow with it a little bit. Sheep don't got that. They got little old feet. So you get a sheep going over and they go on their back. They're stuck because they don't have enough mass. They're now heavy side down. So the picture Jesus has is of the sheep that's like pawing at the air because it can't roll over. And if you leave a sheep like that, how long? For a very long time, they're going to die. Jesus is looking at this crowd of people. This crowd that's come out. And he says these two words. He says, it looks as if they have been cut in the berry bush, and it looks as if they're on their backs and they're stuck. They can't get up. Boy, does that describe anyone's life today? Does anyone feel like in life you just went through the berry bush? And that maybe you got all these little cuts on you? And that maybe, do you feel in some way like you might be a sheep on your back and you can't roll over? It seems like every possible break that you could hope would happen, you just can't really quite get off of that back, and you're still all cut up, and you're just sitting there bleeding, and you're buying, and you're hoping that someone would hear you. Does that describe anyone's life today? I don't want a hand. But I want you to ask yourself, does that sound like you? If it does, then Jesus, she's okay. There's plenty of space up there. Then Jesus is speaking to you today. Because you see, as I look at our world today, I realize that there is a group of people who are harassed and helpless. And that group of people might be you. I don't know if anyone's had debt collectors call them before. But boy, can't debt collectors be a fun crew? She ain't bothering me. Oh, well, so that's fair. Anyone have debt collectors call and harass you? They talk about, they call and they call and they call and then they say, and most of the times people are in the need of debt collection because they can't afford to pay their bills. And sometimes it's because of choices of their own. But sometimes debt collectors call because life happens. People can't get out of it. Sometimes, let me think of another one here, or look at another one. Sometimes I look at a world of harassed and helpless people and I ask, why do ladies feel the need to carry pepper spray? How many of you ladies carry a little can of pepper spray with you? Yeah. Why do we live in a world where that's a felt need? Because that's the reality of our world, is it not? Because our world has created an environment of harassed and helpless people. Why is it that we could go through these situations and realize that there are time after time where our society has created a harassment of people, a helplessness, and we may be those people? Jesus' encouragement, and this is the so what, like how do we move beyond that? Jesus has two suggestions. And oh, by the way, some of these harassments and these helpless people might be your neighbors. So as we're talking, let's think about how that fits into even our neighbors. The first thing that Jesus says is pray. I used to think that prayer was like the console prize. It was like, I can't really do anything else for you, but I can pray. I've said that to people. I've probably said that to some of you. I've said, well, I can't do anything else for you, but I could pray. And then the other day I saw something online, and it struck me very hard is it said that basically, why do I look at the power of God as a secondary thing? The thing that I should most be doing and the thing that is most powerful is prayer. So why do I look at anything else as first when I should look primarily at prayer as the greatest thing I could do? So from that point forward, I've started saying, you know what? The greatest thing I can do is pray. And Jesus says, He says, pray or ask of God to send workers into this. Friends, there is a world of people who feel helpless and harassed, that sin has gotten down. We live in a goodness of Jesus Christ. We live in a position where I know I'm forgiven. You, I pray, know you're forgiven, and if you don't, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But we live in a position where we have a forgiveness, but my neighbors don't. Your neighbors don't. They may not. Where your neighbors or my neighbors may be a people who are still stuck in the perpetual cycle that seems to feed their life. So I realize the first thing that Jesus says is to pray. But the second thing, and the most important thing, and this is where I really want us to hit home today, is He says, have compassion for people. Have compassion for people. When you see your neighbor acting foolish, I've got some neighbors that act foolish. I'm sure you do too. When you see your neighbor acting foolish, realize that that foolishness is just like what Jesus said. It's a sheep without a shepherd. That's His words. He said He saw this crowd and He said that they are all sheep without a shepherd. So when I see my neighbor acting foolish, instead of judging them, instead of holding it against them, I should be a person of compassion. When I see a person who is maybe dressed to gain attention, I'll put it that way. When they're dressed to gain attention, instead of holding judgment, or instead of looking at them and saying, why would that person needs this, I should be a person who says that person is a sheep without a shepherd. Instead of looking at the person who's in the news and saying, man, that is a sad story. I cannot believe anyone would do that. Maybe I should be a person who looks at that person as a sheep without a shepherd. Because I realize that there are a lot of people in this world who are sheep without a shepherd. But you know what I also know? I know there are people in this room right now that are sheep without a shepherd. The next time you hear someone gossiping in the church house, remember they're a sheep without a shepherd, because they might be the person who needs to hear Jesus. See, we were all at one point people who were sheep without a shepherd, weren't we? I don't know about you. There was a time, there might still be times in my life. I won't pretend that I've got it perfect, that I got it figured out. But there are times, there have been times, and there will probably be times where I will live my life in such a way as if I'm a sheep without a shepherd. That should give me empathy, that should give me sympathy, that should give me compassion for the people who live their lives like sheep without a shepherd. And our world's full of them. Our churches are full of them. So, I don't want us to be perfect. We're not going to be. But we should at least be understanding and realize that there are people hurting in our world. You know, the thing that probably gets me the most in this whole conversation is this. It's this idea of evangelism. And oftentimes we think of evangelism as this, like, I have to have, my ducks in a row. I have to have all these, steps memorized. I got to know the 5-step plan of salvation. I got to have book, chapter, and verse for it. And Jesus never really mentioned any of that, did He? Jesus' secret here to loving people was being compassionate towards them. Looking at them and saying, instead of trying to blame them, instead of trying to say something else, He looked at them and He said, you know what? They are sheep without a shepherd. So if you're the type of person who is marketing Jesus with your clothing, if you've got a bumper sticker that says honk if you love Jesus or something like that, if you're a person who's marketing Jesus in your physical outward life, make sure you're marketing Him with your actual life too. Because that's where compassion really comes in, is it not? that I must be a person who is including Jesus in all that I do. Because evangelism is important. And that's really where Jesus is going in this text. He says, pray for the Lord of harvest to send out workers into this field to work with these people because these people need it. Other passages, he'd say the fields are wide into harvest. They're ready to go. But all of our work should be pointing us to the needs of other people, to help them feel needed, included. But ultimately, our purpose is to share the hope of Jesus Christ in a gospel message that goes beyond this life. I'm not focused on the here and the now. As much good as I can do, taking food, taking cookies, taking whatever to my neighbors, my focus is on eternity, the same as yours should be. So our focus should be on what is happening in their soul for the long haul. Evangelism is less about being prepared. It's less about being perfect. But it's about making sure that you have a compassionate heart for people. That when people come into our house here, they see a compassionate heart. When people come into your house at your actual address, at your home, that they see a compassionate heart. When you run into that single mom at Walmart who's struggling with kids and she's got one probably crying and she's got one that's in the basket and you see that and you say that it's about having a compassionate heart. When you see the young guy on the side of the road with the car that's broke down and he's needing help, he's got the hood up, it's about having a compassionate heart. And if you have a compassionate heart, I believe that's the greatest step you could have towards reaching the world for Jesus. Because they'll never listen to us if we don't have compassion first, would they? So I want us as a church to be a church that's filled with compassion. To be a people that's filled with compassion. For our building, our place here, to be a place of compassion. I don't know where you're at. Some of you may have given your life to Christ years ago. This lesson may be nothing more than a great reminder. And if it is, my question is how compassionate are you? How compassionate have you been? If you're a person who is coming new to Christ, new experience, and you say, this is my first, second, third Sunday with Jesus, and I'm looking forward to learning more and more, I want you to know that the Jesus that we serve is the most compassionate person you'll ever meet. He can forgive anything. He can walk with you through anything. He is the greatest being in your life, and He's just waiting for the opportunity. Caleb Glass has our application prayer today. I'm going to go ahead and invite Caleb up and ask that as we pray, as we're mindful of what God has done for us, that we would be compassionate people in a world full of not compassionate people.
Please bow your heads. Dear God, I just want to thank you for letting us come here this morning, everyone getting here safe. I appreciate Josh's lesson. I pray that you help us keep that throughout our hearts this week, and not only that, throughout our lives. Help us stay safe throughout the week, grow closer to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Let's stand to sing. We declare that the kingdom of God is